Hello and welcome to another Denis Wick interview. And my name's Brett Baker, and it gives me great pleasure to talk to Kate Amrine. First of all, to get some context, it's good to just talk about where exactly you are in the United States and why you're in that particular area.
For sure. So I live in New York City, specifically Brooklyn. That's where I am right now. I moved here in 2010 to go to New York University for undergrad. I ended up staying here since then, although I did my master's at Peabody in Baltimore, and my parents live in Maryland, so I would stay with them and then come back to the city on the weekends for gigs. And it was a lot of crazy traveling, but made it through, graduated. And then just recently, last month, I finished my doctorate Stony Brook University on Long Island.
Have you always been a trumpet player, or did you start on something else and sort of end up on trumpet? How did that all work out?
I've always been a trumpet player, but actually, when I started in fourth grade, I actually wanted to play clarinet, and my boyfriend plays clarinet, so it's funny to hear that now because I'm like, what? No, I would never play clarinet. But it's your classic story. I like walked into the band room, and the teacher's like, "What do you want to play?" And I'm like, "Clarinet," and she gives me a clarinet, and I like could not make a sound at all. And I was like, well, I guess this isn't gonna be the thing, but I knew I wanted to be in band. So she's like, here's a trumpet mouthpiece, like buzz. And I was like, oh, and I just like did it instantly. And I was like, oh, this is it. So
And do you play any other instruments other than trumpet?
no, not really. I play flugabone also, a little bit, not super well. I do some home recording gigs, so every now and then the person who I record for will ask to do like a flugabone track, and because I write my own parts for those tunes, I never write something like that complicated. But I can play a little bit. It's not usually an instrument I would want to play in public though, so mostly just all the trumpets.
Is there an event that you feel that allowed you to sort of stop thinking like a student and sort of think, okay, I'm thinking more like a professional now, and I'm imparting knowledge to people, and involved in the whole sort of thinking like a pro rather than thinking like a student.
Ooh, that's a good question. I honestly haven't felt like a student for a very long time because I was always playing and performing like since I moved to New York. I really tried to, I would say, like market myself, but even just present myself not as someone that was in school. And so, and even when I was doing my master's, people always joked I would just not tell anyone that I was in school. So no one really knew for a while. Then eventually it got out that I was doing my master's because I didn't want to lose out on gigs. So I didn't want people to say, oh, she's busy, she's in school, um, because I wanted to still be thought of. So I haven't felt like a student probably since undergrad, which I actually only did for 3 years because I graduated a year early. So I was very eager to not be a student at all. Not that there's obviously anything wrong with being a student. I literally just graduated.
You've got a big show coming up where you're going to be performing one of your own compositions. So should we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, let's do it. So this is a piece that has had a long life at this point. So I wrote, so it's called As I Am, and I wrote it actually when I was finishing my master's at Peabody. I was putting together my graduating recital, and I knew I wanted it to be music all by women composers. So this was in 2017. So this was still, I think, pretty new at the time. Now, of course, everyone's like, oh yes, obviously we should program music by women. But back then, not a thing that was happening very often, shockingly. And I was putting all that music together and I realized like two things. One, I should record it because I had commissioned some of these pieces. And then I was like, well, I'm not going to record like two pieces. I might as well record all of them and make an album. So I made it all into an album. And then once I was thinking of what to put on the album, I had everything recorded. And then I was like, I can't put out an album and not put any of my own music on there. And I didn't really consider myself a composer. Even now I'm like, am I a composer? Yes, yes, I am a composer. Like I have music recorded, performing it, I'm a composer. But at the time I was like, how would I write something? And because so much of my like composing experience is more of in a jazz context, I just started improvising into my phone and the voice memo app, and then recorded a bunch of takes of what I thought this piece could be. And then I listened back and like transcribed what I wrote, edit out the stuff that I didn't like, and then it came to be this nice little beautiful tune in Sibelius. And then I started performing it on solo shows. I obviously recorded it for that album, became the title track of the album, and I loved it as a flugelhorn solo. And then in the pandemic, I was like, okay, well, this piece would be really, really cool with string quartet. So I made a lead sheet for the tune and worked with a friend to draft some chords for it. She was just playing on piano, and we were like going back and forth of figuring out like what chord structure would go behind the melody for everything. And then I made the lead sheet with the specific rhythms that I wanted the strings to play, and sort of, so I wasn't really doing, I didn't do the orchestration, but I feel like I outlined it exactly in terms of like rhythms and who's coming in where, and like don't include the third in this chord and that kind of stuff. Sent it to my friend to orchestrate it, and then she got her orchestra to record it, so just string quartet, and then had this great recording. And I've been shopping it around to orchestras, and this was actually the first group that I emailed, and he's like, yeah, let's program it. And I was like, oh, like, okay, let's do it, like, let's, yeah. So it was really exciting to get that yes.
And in terms of the various accessories and products that you use, um, how do they continue to sort of help you develop as a musician? I mean, do you use a lot of mutes in your performances? Do you change mouthpiece a lot, like a lot of trumpet players that I know? Or do you tend to stick to that's my go-to mouthpiece for B flat? That's what I use.
I'm definitely a stick with the mouthpiece kind of gal. As much as sometimes, you know, previously and many years ago, it was maybe to my detriment. But for B flat C, I play the 3C Ultra. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, like, what is this extra material? Like, why is it so big? And I also have the regular American Classic 3C, and that's what I play on E flat. And actually, when I got both, I remember emailing Mary about it, and I was so torn because I'm like, they're both so great. And I knew I had to pick one because I couldn't just play both like randomly for fun. Like, that's not how it works. At least for me. Like, I need to pick something that I know that I've practiced on, like, obviously. So it was really hard to choose. And so I settled on this one just because I really loved the extra resonance that I was getting from it. I had played a Bach 3C for so long, and I was using that for everything. It was like my classical mouthpiece, my jazz mouthpiece, my musical theater mouthpiece, my lead mouthpiece. And I was playing so many different things, like as a freelancer in New York, that my sound had gotten really blended, and I felt like I didn't have this clear sound of like who I was, which I think maybe other people wouldn't care about necessarily, like other freelancers. But because I do a lot of solo work and I'm playing like new pieces for Trumpet Electronics, like having my own sound of like, this is me as a trumpet player was really important. And I felt like I kind of lost that with that mouthpiece. So I was like, okay, I need to figure this out. And I don't really remember what drew me back to Denis Wick, but I had friends, you know, who were on these mouthpieces, and I had heard so many great things. And obviously I have all the mutes. If you don't have the mutes, like obviously everyone listening needs to get the mutes. Big deal. And so I was talking to Mary, and she sent me, because I knew like 3C was the way to go, but I don't really know in terms of like American Classic or Heritage or like, and I didn't even know about the Ultra. So I think when she sent it to me, I was like this, like really? Okay, like I'm gonna try it. But yeah, I was totally blown away. And so I use my American Classic on E flat, and I feel like it has that really nice like clarity and ping in the sound, which is like so perfect for E flat. I did so many like back and forth recordings on both of these and sent it to a lot of people. And I sent it to a lot of people who had like different style experiences, like people who were more classical players, people who weren't. And everyone had different opinions. So I was like, okay, like they both sound good. That's the problem. I know they both sound good, but I need to pick one. So of course, the more classical people were like, oh, I like the American Classic better because you have that ping in your sound. And I'm like, well, the ping is so good, E flat. Like I'm gonna use it on that. Um, yeah, I feel like this is like such a perfect mouthpiece for me. I'm really happy about it.
And then finally, so who inspired you more? The people that you grew up with in terms of playing, or the people that you were at music college with, or was it more recordings or teachers?
I think teachers and the people that I was always playing with, especially when I was younger, I would take this notebook that I have with me, and every time I played duets with someone or went to a show or, you know, heard someone else play, I would write down the things that I really admired in that person's playing. So things, you know, like, oh my God, their articulation was so crisp. Like, how do they do it? And so I would hear that. And I feel like those are always the things that you want to work on, because you're like, oh my God, they're doing that thing so well. Like, how do I do that thing really well? So I would just always write down those things, and then of course practice them. So I think like being surrounded by so many inspiring people in New York, like still now, very lucky to have, you know, you show up to a random church gig and you're like, oh my God, like everyone else here is incredible. Like this is so cool. So that has definitely been really, really great. Teachers, for sure. I was really lucky in undergrad to study with Lori Frank. I feel like I was so young when I was studying with her. I was like 18, 19, 20, and I wish I got to meet her now, 10 years later, because I feel like I would have asked her even more questions, like different questions, and gotten to learn from her as an adult would have been really, really cool. Um, but yeah, definitely teachers. I feel like playing side by side with someone, it's a lot easier to learn really quickly, like what you're doing, what you're not doing, what you should be doing. Um, and then even just hearing from teachers' experiences about what they're doing and what they choose to prioritize, I always feel like is really inspiring.
Well, that's fabulous. Thank you very much, Kate, for taking time out to do this interview, and we'll catch up with you very soon.
Of course, thank you so much.